The topic for today is setting up a line, and I've listed here the agenda of what we will actually be going through. Things have changed tremendously since 2003 when I arrived in Shanghai, where things were tremendously complex in terms of setting up a business in China. And changes have occurred throughout the last 16 years, where today, from my perspective of having done this for 16 years, things are definitely much more simplified than they used to be. Please don't get overwhelmed by the content in this presentation. It does all sound extremely complex, but it is information that you do need to know in order to decide how you're going to structure your business in China. So let's start off with the first type of legal entity that exists. The first one is a representative office, and we'll go through what it is, what it can do, and what criteria are required to establish the rep office. The first point is, what is a representative office? And basically what it means is that the shareholding company, which will be abroad, and to emphasize, no individual can set up a representative office. It has to be a corporate entity that does that, that is based. A representative office is purely a liaison office. So as I've highlighted here in red, what it means is this office, this representative office in China, can on the ground physically communicate, cooperate, and facilitate working relationships. It can do no more. It cannot trade, it cannot sign contracts, it should not negotiate any forms of deals or contracts. It should purely be a type of liaison office liaising with people in China and liaising with the head office or sister companies abroad. The business scope, when you do set up a representative office, I've basically translated it from Chinese, and this is the business scope that goes on your business license. There is no other alternative. So what it actually states is that you can do market research, you can do product display, which means you can have a showroom, and you can do publicity/marketing events locally in China, based on the foreign company's products or services. Okay, it should not do anything else, and it's only then doing liaison work if it is associated with actual transactions that are occurring, meaning translating. You are translating the information that you're receiving from your head office to give it to Chinese suppliers, to give it to Chinese distributors. That's as far as the communication can go. The criteria to set up a representative office is extremely strict, and it has become more and more strict over the years. My belief is truly that one day China will remove office options for foreign investors. This is the way that I see it going, primarily because most foreign investors abuse what they can do in the rep office. They always go outside of their business scope, and the government is realizing that. So the key thing about the rep office is that the parent company, the shareholder, has to have existed for at least 2 years. Why are they doing that? Because in the past, a lot of individuals, in order to get visas, would set up a Hong Kong company that in those days you could do within 5 working days, and then immediately set up a rep office. This is now gone. So you do need to have a shareholding company that is at least 2 years old. You cannot employ people directly. You can only employ Westerners, foreigners directly, and you are limited to having only 4 foreign visas. But otherwise, local employees, mainland Chinese employees, you must go through a labor dispatch agency, meaning that the labor dispatch agency employs the local employees, and in turn, there's a service agreement between the rep office and the labor dispatch agency. There is no investment requirement to establish the rep office because it's not a legal entity as such. It's not a limited liability company. It's just a liaison office, a rep office, which means that the shareholding company has to fund that office and transfer on a monthly basis or quarterly basis in order to pay for the local expenses. The next type of entity, which is obviously the ones that the Chinese government is trying to promote amongst Western or foreign invested companies, are limited liability companies. Now, I want to emphasize here, there are going to be two slides. One is to highlight what a WFOE is, and the other is to highlight what a FICE is. If you've done your own research online, please note, whether it's a WFOE or a FICE, you are still setting up a limited liability company. The difference between a WFOE and a FICE is based on your business scope. So a WFOE for me means you don't do any import, export, or trade. It is purely service-oriented companies, consulting companies, recruitment companies, restaurants, management services, whatever else you can imagine that is related to service, architecture firms, interior design firms. These are all related to WFOEs. I really wish people take the concept WFOE and FICE out and just liability companies. Unfortunately, there's too much content on the internet. It's impossible to delete all of that. But basically, a WFOE does no import, export, no trade, no manufacturing. It's purely service-oriented. If you look at a FICE, which is Foreign Invested Commercial Enterprise, this is basically companies that have import-export rights, hence can do wholesale, retail, e-commerce, manufacturing, etc. The key aspect that you have to realize is that a FICE, you can kind of say, has a higher level in terms of business scope because service is also encompassed in this. So when you are trading, you still have a technical service in terms of quality control, and types of things that are anyhow included in scope. From my perspective, manufacturing is really the highest level because you can do assembly, manufacturing, trade, and service all in one. If you set up a restaurant, don't assume that you can then have a trading company. That does not work. These would be two different types of entities and structures. Now, I'm going to list here also other forms of legal entities. One is a domestically owned enterprise. And you're probably wondering as a foreign investor why I've even included that inside. Well, as you'll see as my last point, domestically owned enterprises are much faster to set up. And most companies generally will start off their China journey by hiring someone on the ground first who is on a freelance agreement of some sort, if any at all, with the foreign invested company. And they will use this individual who is mainland Chinese to set up then a local company on their behalf. This is basically bypassing a formal registration for a foreign invested company. And as I've highlighted here, this is totally at your own risk. Studies of foreign investors who have actually ventured into the Chinese market with this route, who have never paid attention to what the individual has done, never asked for licenses, don't even know if it's been formally established, but they just give money because who else is supposed to fund that entity? And money then gets lost and is never tracked. Be wary if you're going to go this route, and or you're using a provider that can guide you to make sure you remain compliant. Ultimately, you do eventually want to switch the structure to a FICE or a WFOE to make sure you own and control that entity. The next is a joint venture. These still happen today, particularly in sectors where it's prohibited or restricted, where you are required to have a joint venture, a Chinese partner. Joint ventures, in my opinion, are like marriages. Marriage rates nowadays, generally divorce rates are quite high. You've got to be wary of establishing a joint venture. And as highlighted in my last point, be very wary of exit strategies. Make sure those are implemented within your joint venture contracts. Foreign invested partnerships are rarely heard of, and they predominantly are for law firms or any form of partnership structures where you have partners within an entity. They have greater flexibility compared to joint venture structures, but again, they're primarily used for law firms, accounting firms, where you have a partnership structure in place. Now, when you are going through your structural plan to set up your company in China, I've listed here 10 main points you should go through to understand what type of structure you're actually going to develop, right? And we'll go through each of these 10 points now. The first one, and we'll look at it from a perspective of rep office versus limited liability company, okay, WFOE fines. The first is liability. Obviously, with a limited liability company, i.e. WFOE fines, you're going to be limited to the investment capital that you put in the structure. The representative office really has no liability because it's a liaison office. And I say there's there is minimal liability with a rep office primarily because you haven't invested any capital. But as long as you are doing everything within the business scope as stated, you're fine. If you are starting to venture out and do activities that are outside of the business scope, be wary. Limited liability companies obviously offer greater flexibility, primarily because you can then set up branch offices. You're not limited by the number of visas you can issue for foreigners. It just generally gives you more flexibility to expand and to garner opportunities, which I think is a very key issue. You don't want to get into a situation where you're bidding for a project, you win it, and you realize that the structure you have in China cannot cater to that opportunity. And having a limited company gives you that flexibility to cater to any opportunities that arise. Marketability, this is primarily just saying that whether you have a rep office or a limited liability is already great because it's showing that you have some form of commitment to the Chinese market. If you have a limited liability company, it does show generally to the Chinese population that you are more committed to the market. You are there for the long term. You're not going to go away just because the market is unsuccessful, which could happen with a rep office. So there, liability, flexibility, and marketability should be three key considerations you make when choosing the structure. The other is business scope. What do you want to do in China, right? This is something that people have difficulty in answering me. I mean, they'll come to me with a plan of some sort, but when I ask them, what is your short-term objective and what is your long-term objective? Short-term is very clear. Long-term, when I say, give me your 10-year projection, oh, we've never thought that far. Please do. Think about your short and long-term objectives. What do you eventually want to do in the Chinese market? The biggest thing about the business scope is understanding if you want to start generating revenue in China, you cannot do that through a rep office. And I can tell you now, if you set up a rep office, decide to go the limited company route, you cannot switch and convert. That does not exist in China. You need to liquidate the rep office and set up the limited company fresh. And that will cost you money. So be very clear about what activities you want to do in the short and long-term stage. Registered office address. A lot of people don't realize this. Both structures, you do need to have a registered office address. With a representative office, generally speaking, it needs to be in a commercial A or B grade building. C grade is acceptable in most of the tier 1 cities. If you are a limited company, you have to look at your business scope, i.e. what activities have you decided upon, and a space that suits that. If you are saying in your business scope that you're going to be doing assembly and manufacturing, you cannot be in a commercial space. You would have to be in a warehouse facility or production plant facility. If you are doing retail, you cannot be in a commercial space. You need to be in a retail space. There are a lot of these considerations that you make, but what is very clear here, virtual offices are not accepted. You need to have a space for, so you need to have a room number and you need to physically have an office space. Another key point I just want to mention here is please don't pick a registered office address, choose that, and then be located somewhere else. There are surprise visits that occur with the government that just pop by your office, and if nobody is there, then they can revoke your license and there can be penalties that exist. The name of the Chinese company, this is where a lot of troubles arise. You can only register a Chinese name. The English name is not legal. Of course, you can have an English name. So for example, for us, it's Woodburn Management Consulting Shanghai Company Limited. I market myself as Woodburn. I never use my Chinese name. The only time you will see the Chinese name is actually on a FAPIA, an official VAT invoice. That's just how we run our business. But we did have to come up with a Chinese name. When we set up our company, it did take about 6 to 8 weeks to finally find a name that was accepted, approved, and available. The average time frame to find a Chinese name is around 6 to 8 weeks. And I think the worst case we had is a client who came up with over 100 Chinese names, hired a feng shui master to come up with the Chinese names in order to finally find one that got registered. So this is definitely an obstacle, one that does take a lot of time. The key consideration here is, do you have a trademark that's already registered in Chinese? Will you be able to use that Chinese trademark for your company name? Is the Chinese name critical for your branding and your marketing, or could you just deal with whatever available? And both of this applies to a rep office and a limited company. So definitely this is a roadblock, but one that can definitely be surpassed. Just be patient. Total investment in registered capital. So as I mentioned earlier, representative office does not have any investments. All right. The registered capital is capital that you are, for a limited company, putting in that will be utilized as your working capital to pay off all your startup costs, all your startup expenses. For example, fit out of your office space, payroll, salaries, paying, so it's actually money that you physically use. Total investment is, there's a ratio that is fixed depending on the level of you're going to be investing between the registered capital and total investment. But basically the difference between the two numbers is your foreign debt loan. So which is utilized, it's the only form of loan you can obtain in China as a foreign investor, and it's money that can be paid back. The idea is to make sure you calculate this correctly, that you don't run out of cash, so that you're not in a position where you pay rent and you can't pay salaries. Trust me, this is critical, and this is where a lot of companies fall short as they begin to develop their business because they don't have enough cash on their accounts. Please be wary of this and make sure you create a business plan, create a budget to know how much capital you're going to need until you have positive cash flow. The critical point is the corporate structure. When you establish your representative office, the only thing that you will need to appoint when you see this is the legal representative of the China company, which is point 4, which for a rep office is called chief representative. For a limited company, you have a lot more people to appoint. And obviously, if you're a small organization, you're probably not going to find all the necessary people. The beauty of this, however, is you can go with a small corporate structure where you have the executive director, the legal rep, and the GM be the same individual, and the supervisor is somebody else. And then you obviously have the shareholding company, and you have whoever is the authorized signatory of the shareholding company. If your shareholding company has, for example, 3 board members, try and pick just one to do all the signing. It creates a lot less hassle in terms of that. If you would like more explanations about the roles and responsibilities of each, don't hesitate to ask. I could do a whole nother webinar session just on that. The next 2 topics about human resources and ongoing operational costs, what a lot of companies ask me is, what is a cheaper way for me to get into the market? I wish people wouldn't think like that. I wish people would think, what type of structure is going to garner me success in the Chinese market, not what is the cheaper option. If you go the cheaper route, whatever option you choose, and you think it's the cheaper route, you're already with that mind frame, you're not going to be successful in the Chinese market. With the human resource aspect, the representative office is limiting. So again, think about flexibility. You can only have 4 visas for 4 foreigners, and you have to use a labor dispatch agency to hire your mainland Chinese staff. With a limited liability company, you have the ability to hire as many foreigners as you like, making sure that they are in roles that are required to have foreigners be in those roles. Because when you apply for their visas, one of the biggest questions from the Public Security Bureau will be, why can these roles not be fulfilled by the mainland Chinese? Okay, so choose foreigners that are critical, whether it's a language component, whether it's a responsibility component that fits that role. You can hire people direct, meaning you can employ contracts directly, and obviously use a payroll agent to do the payroll functions, but you have that flexibility to sign things direct, choosing the length of term of the contract, giving you greater flexibility in terms of this. For ongoing operational costs, it's the same between a rep office and a limited company. You have to do accounting, you have to do tax filing, you have to do a year-end audit. The compliance procedures are the same. Obviously, because a rep office has no trade transactions running through it, the accounting is more simplified. It's just a cost center. But in terms of procedures and workflow, it's identical to a limited company. You still have to create a P&L for a rep office. You still have to create a balance sheet, etc. Now you've decided on your structure and it's time to register your company. I think one of the first things you have to remember is it is an old-fashioned process, meaning you will get overwhelmed by all the documentation. On average, per application, you will, generally in my document list, you'll have 19 sections of documents, both Chinese and in English, that have to be printed out and signed. You're only permitted to use a ballpoint pen. You're not allowed to use a ballpoint pen. It cannot be any other color besides black. That's a cultural item that you have to be aware of when submitting the documents. Documents have been refused if you've even used a black ballpoint pen. It has to be an ink pen. It is very old-fashioned. You have to be prepared for it. It is overwhelming, but obviously, whether you use a law firm or use a corporate service provider, they're there to guide you in this step and provide you with explanations on it. The process for establishing your Chinese company, I've listed here the step-by-step procedure, name approval. I haven't actually given timelines because, for example, the name approval, that's purely luck. Whether the first 5 names that we provide will get accepted or not. On average, for most of my clients that I've been helping out in the last year, it's been between 6 to 8 weeks, actually, just for the name approval. Then, if you're in manufacturing, you have to get an environmental license. A lot of the procedures now are also online, which is beautiful. Business licenses are also now combined. So when you get your business license, that has already been approved within 5 bureaus. So again, procedures are taking much shorter than they used to be. I know this sounds overwhelming with the 9 steps. Truly, it is not. If I would compare it to what it was in the past, you would be looking at probably 15 different steps. So things have definitely improved over time. These are just some of the documents that you have to be aware of. So you'll have an online application form or application form that needs to be completed, articles of association, which are the company bylaws or joint venture contracts. You have to notarize the shareholder documents. I've listed here double notarized because in the UK, for example, you need to get your notary republic to notarize. That is then forwarded to the Chinese consulate to notarize. You've got then appointment letters for the various corporate structures, so who you're going to appoint as executive director, legal rep, GM, etc. A commitment letter, which I always laugh about. This is a template provided the government, which basically just states, I will not do anything against the PRC law. And you're committing to that fact. That's a fixed template. You have to show the ownership structure of the shareholders, so who, all the way up to the beneficial owners. That's a must. That's also a requirement by the bank. Passport copies and landlord documents. As I mentioned earlier, you need a registered office address, and we need documents from the landlord to prove that that address is acceptable for the type of structure you're setting up. My conclusion and tips. First thing, if you are at the stage of pre-investment, please look for pre-investment advisory. Something that we do on behalf of our clients is really look at the business scope. What activities do you want to do? You should really have that set up before you do anything in the Chinese market. If you want to change anything, so for example, you've already incorporated and you want to change your business scope, change the legal rep, change your investment capital, registered capital amounts, that process takes between 8 to 12 weeks. So, it's better to make sure before you do anything that it's to the level you want it to do based on your short and long-term objectives. I say it's, your aim should also be to reduce administrative costs. Making sure you do things right from the get-go will be much cheaper for you than if you have to make any changes later on, either with the structure, changing from a rep office to a limited company. Like I said, you can't just convert. It's liquidating, setting up new. So be aware of that, be aware of all of these things. I always believe that power is knowledge, knowledge is power in China. The more you know about the legalities and the regulations, the more prepared you are, and that does help you to reduce costs in the long run. So Zhao, I think that's my presentation. I zoomed through that. I hope I didn't talk too fast.
No, I think it's really good, and I've learned a lot from just listening to that, because I know that sometimes the regulation also got updated.
Correct.
As well. So I'm actually refreshing my knowledge as well. So thanks very much, Christina. I hope you guys have found the presentation really useful and helpful as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can help you, and also how we can work together with Christina to help you to set you up in China. Before we take questions, I would like to talk a little bit more about how we can help. So as I mentioned before, at Crayfish we have two platforms. One is a marketplace, where for small and simple projects you can just post the project online, use our self-service platform, and then you can choose your supplier as well. And we also offer Crayfish Enterprise, where you have a dedicated relationship manager, and the quality will be supervised by Crayfish. Those are more for large and complex projects. And in terms of the service offering from Crayfish, we call ourselves a full service partner because we work together with suppliers and providers like Woodburn to ensure the quality and also to ensure that's the coverage of our service. So as you can see here, we cover from strategy to operation, including planning, from HR to marketing, from setting up in China to the culture and language training as well. And specifically on how we help you to set up in China, we work closely with partners like Woodburn and Christina, so that we can take you through the whole process. And also we also offer you operation and logistic and admin support using the power of our freelancers and providers online as well. So there are also upcoming webinars that is going to happen next week and the week after next, more focusing on marketing perspective. The first one will be more focusing on B2B digital marketing, and the second one will be focusing on WeChat. So if you are interested, please do sign up. And we are also going to share today's recording with you guys shortly after the webinar. So now it's the time for us to take questions. The first question is actually from me, Christina. I know that you said it's a complex process, and you talked about all the difficulties and the barriers that we are about to encounter. My question is it really that complex to set up the business?
It's actually not really complex to set up, because if you've done this pre-investment advisory stage and you've prepared yourself and understand what your short and long-term objectives are, then the only thing that is complex is time frame. That's probably the only obstacle that will arise during, or let's say not obstacle, it's the frustration that will arise as you are setting up your company, because obviously once you've got everything done in terms of the pre-investment advisory and your market research, basically tomorrow you want to get set up and start. And obviously you have to then go through this whole application stage, which, like I said, the name approval is probably the biggest obstacle there is. If you're looking at like time frames in terms of setting up the company, I hate to give time frames because I can't guarantee a lot of things that will happen with the government bureaus. For example, not getting the name right, having to consistently provide new Chinese names, or if the government has a backlog of applications, I can't control that either. So where I just had a case now where we did the online application, and I get a response on the screen which says, you will be approved within 48 to 72 hours. We were not. It took 5 working days to get approved. So, you know, there are a lot of things that I have no control or power over, but neither would a lawyer, quite frankly. And that could be because of backlogs within the government bureaus, because maybe even documents have to be slightly changed because of the characters you're using in Chinese. There are all these little nuances that might exist where you just have to be patient. So if I'm looking at a good application for, let's say, a trading company, I would honestly say, and trust me, bank account openings are not a piece of cake anymore either. So choose your bank wisely as well. Can be anywhere from 6 to 9 months. So, and you do need a lot of patience. And when you're dealing with business in China anyhow, patience is a critical trait you should learn from the get-go anyhow.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. So the next question is, because you talked about the time, is there any difference if we set up different types of companies?
Sure. So obviously, if you're setting up the more complex manufacturing structure, there are more steps to the project because you have to go through an environmental license. You have to get an environmental license. That step alone could take between 4 to 8 weeks. So definitely for a manufacturing company, and I really like to be conservative, I would say with a manufacturing company, you're looking at around 12 months for the establishment of the company. There are a lot of things that could happen simultaneously. So the minute you get your business license, which means you have your environmental license, you can already start the fit out of the factory, actually. With a trading company, like I said, it's about 6 to 9 months. Things that are critical for the trading company is, for example, if you're in retail, make sure you have a retail space. I would need the lease agreement of the retail space. If you're in e-commerce, and you want to apply for an ICP license, meaning you're developing your own Chinese website to be able to sell your products online through that site, you need an ICP license. That's extremely difficult to obtain, and again, it will take more time. Consulting companies are probably the easiest, where there it could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months to set up. Specific licenses that have to be applied for, like I said, the ICP license for e-commerce. If you're in food and beverage sector, you would need to get, you know, the food license, get labeling done and whatnot. This all adds time to the procedures.
Yeah. The last question for today, to sum up, why, as a company, why should I set up a representative office, or why liability company?
I mean, that has to be, that's a very client-specific question. But if I would have to generalize now, if you are looking to generate revenue in the Chinese market and you want to generate that revenue in China by issuing fapiaos, which is official VAT invoices, you can only do that through a limited liability company, i.e. through a WFOE or FIS. If your aim of going into the Chinese market is purely for marketing reasons, for liaison reasons, and that is both your short and long-term objective, by all means, go the rep office route. But that would truly not, I actually really try to persuade clients to never go the rep office route, because I have had 100% of my clients over the last 16 years want to at some point generate revenue in China. And it was primarily because they didn't want to lose out on an opportunity with a high-level client who has requested to receive an official VAT invoice, and they've lost the bid because they don't have that structure or entity. And you can lose the opportunity because if you look at the time frame to set up, right, you're not yet there. You need 6 to 9 months for a trading company. Mm-hmm. So you're losing the opportunity on those bids if you're not already set up, which is, you know, in my opinion, a pity, because it could potentially lead to losing then other bids in your pipeline. That's why I try to persuade clients to avoid rep office, because I know at some point they'll want to generate revenue locally.